If you were anything like me growing up with unrestricted internet access from a very young age, you probably met this guy, Jeff the Killer. With his pale face, his creepy eyes, and his comically large smile. This one image, and I suppose a few other similar images that are tied to the character, burned themselves into the minds of an entire generation of kids that grew up online. Although the story is heavily criticized and critiqued today, for good reason, it was still one of the most popular creepypastas back in the early 2010s. And why was that? What was the deal with Jeff the Killer? If you don't know the story, I'll give a brief summary, and if you already know it, you can skip to this timestamp. Jeff is a normal 13-year-old boy who moves into a new neighborhood with his family after his dad gets a promotion at work. Not long after they settle in, a neighbor stops by to introduce herself and invites them to her son's birthday party. Jeff and his brother Lou don't really feel like going, but their mom is gonna make them go anyway. The same day, Jeff starts getting this weird feeling. Not so much a pain, but a weird feeling. He dismisses it as nothing. The next morning, the feeling gets stronger until it eventually fades again. While waiting for the bus, Jeff and Lou encounter three kids, Randy, Keith, and Troy, who try to rob them and pull a knife on them. Jeff gets that feeling again, and he steps in, fights them off, and ends up beating them pretty badly. But instead of being seen as self-defense, Jeff and Lou panic when the bus approaches and they run away. The next day, the police show up at their door. Lou takes the blame to protect Jeff and ends up getting sent to juvenile detention. Jeff is left alone, feeling guilty and dejected. A few days later, their mom makes Jeff go to the birthday party. He's not in the mood, but he goes anyway. At first, he keeps to himself, but eventually joins in with the younger kids and actually starts having some fun. Until Randy and the others show up again. His posse point their guns at the other partygoers and tell them not to interrupt the fight that's about to happen between Jeff and Randy. Things escalate fast. There's a fight, there's threats, and eventually Jeff gets badly burned when bleach and fire get involved during the struggle with the three kids. Jeff wakes up in a hospital, wrapped in bandages. Over time, his skin heals in an impossible way. His face turns pale, his lips turn red, and his hair turns black. When the bandages come off, he reacts with an unsettling calm and bursts into laughter. The doctors think it's just the medication. Later that night, Jeff's mom finds him in the bathroom, cutting a smile into his face and burning off his eyelids. He says he wants to always smile and always see his face. Terrified, she wakes up Jeff's father to get a gun, but Jeff kills them both before they can act on anything. He then sneaks into Lou's room and, with a knife in hand, says what would later become his iconic killer catchphrase.
Just go to sleep.
This story is the story that most people credit as the original story of Jeff the Killer. However, it's not technically the original. The creepypasta story that I summarized was most likely uploaded to the creepypasta wiki on November 21st, 2011 by a user named GameFuelTV. After looking through his DeviantArt page, I was able to find a profile comment that was posted on November 5th, 2013 that read, "To the fans of Jeff the Killer, no, I am not the maker. The pasta was posted with my account. My brother Travis is the maker. No, he doesn't have anything you can contact him with. I am sorry, Joshua." So while this version of the story is the most well known, it's not actually the first mention of the character. A YouTube channel by the name of Seswar uploaded a video titled Jeff the Killer in 2008. The original video has since been deleted, but several re-uploads of it still exist. In this video, we can see the true original backstory given to the character of Jeff the Killer. In this version of Jeff, he is much older, and so is his brother Lou. His face became deformed because he was carrying a gallon of acid into his bathroom, and he slipped on a bar of soap, causing the acid to spill all over his face. His screams alert the neighbors and they take him to the hospital. Lou rushed to the hospital when he heard what happened to Jeff, and Jeff was never the same. That is technically the true original story of Jeff the Killer. It's most likely that GameFuel TV's brother saw Sessuar's video, thought it was an interesting concept, and wrote his own story on his idea of Jeff the Killer. And then the 2011 story became the more well-known one. And for our purposes, the 2011 story is the one that we're going to be talking about in this video, considering most of the culture surrounding Jeff the Killer is based on this version of the story. The modern consensus of the creepypasta story is that while being one of the pioneers of internet horror at the time, it definitely could have used a lot of improvement, and like many others, I have to agree. When I heard this story for the first time, I was probably like 6 or something, and it made so much sense back then. But even then, at my ripe young age of 6, when people started pointing out the obvious flaws with the story, even I had to be like, that's a good point. So while the story definitely did its job at the time, which was mostly to scare children, it didn't take long for people to start noticing the flaws with the story, causing it to lose a lot of its credibility. Over the years, something strange started happening to Jeff once the story and character became more and more popular, and as more people started abandoning him, a new group of people started adopting him as their own, and through this, Jeff went from this to this. How does this even happen? Seriously, how could anyone read the story of Jeff and see pictures like these and come to the conclusion that he's just like misunderstood or something? Well, the 2011 story of Jeff is incredibly edgy, most likely written by a child or early teen themselves. He essentially became a symbol of teenage angst, and there are a few reasons as to why this is. Number 1, Jeff is the only real character. Jeff the Killer is a story where the centerpiece is a child. Jeff is 13 in the original story, and he might be the only character that can actually make decisions. What I mean by that is, although there are adult characters, they serve no purpose other than to just exist for the sake of existing. For example, Jeff's mother. When the police show up to take Jeff away to juvenile detention, their mother does absolutely nothing to try and find common ground or to try and ask what it's all about. She seems like oddly complicit, but then when Lou covers for Jeff, the mother doesn't even question how her presumably younger child was able to overpower 3 12-year-old kids at once. Also, during the birthday party fight with the 3 bullies versus Jeff, it's written that 2 bullies held everyone at gunpoint, but are we honestly supposed to imagine that not even a few adults were able to overpower these 2 actual 12-year-olds? We're also just supposed to assume that Jeff's parents and the rest of the adults did absolutely nothing about this extremely dangerous fight between boys where knives, guns, bleach, alcohol, and fire were used. And to top it all off, at the end of the story, when confronted with her son cutting his face in the mirror, instead of trying to get help for her son who is clearly having some sort of mental break, she tries to wake up her husband to get the gun to kill her son.
What's 17 more years? I can always start again. Make another kid.
What kind of adults are these? This mother exists just to exist. She adds almost nothing to the story, just like all the other adult characters. The police officers literally just take Lou to juvie, no court case or anything. It would make sense if this story were written by a child who doesn't understand how a courtroom works. When Jeff takes his bandages off to see his new face for the first time and starts manically laughing, the doctors brush it off as typical for patients that have taken very large amounts of painkillers, and then tells the mother that if his behavior doesn't change in a few weeks, bring him back here and we'll give him a psychological test. But in what universe is manically laughing like a madman after seeing your deformed face for the first time considered a typical response to painkillers? The adults in this story are painfully incompetent. And by the way, incompetent adults by themselves aren't inherently a writing flaw. Many other stories pull it off very nicely. It's the fact that this story plays it off like it's normal or something. This leads me to believe that the author was most likely pretty young when they wrote it, probably around Jeff's age. Most other angsty teenagers feel like the adults in their lives don't understand their struggle or whatever they're going through. So the adults being practically useless could have been an element that resonated with other kids at the time. They believed that the adults in their lives were useless, so it resonated when the story reflected that. Number 2. Jeff's dialogue and new persona. Jeff's dialogue is some of the edgiest dialogue I have ever read. Now, for more Jeff dialogue, you would have had to search for the follow-up stories. These stories weren't written by the original creepypasta author, but rather by people who just really liked Jeff's story and wanted to write extra content, basically fan fiction. And because of this, Jeff's dialogue grew until it didn't even feel like the original. Jeff sounded extremely troubled at the end of the 2011 creepypasta, but in the follow-up stories, he sounds like some teenage projection about what they think that Jeff should talk like. Although the dialogue in the original story isn't the best, Jeff's dialogue felt the most natural, at least more than the other characters. And if you pay attention to how he speaks at the end of the first story, it seems like the follow-up stories just completely abandon the approach taken. At the end of the creepypasta, he's portrayed like a psychopath and like he lost his humanity. And yet, the follow-up stories don't portray him like that, choosing to portray him more like some edgy, misunderstood anti-hero.
You're just like me, aren't you? You don't hurt people. You help people. You just haven't seen the right way to do it yet.
There are no ghosts. Those are fake terrors, imaginary, thought up by those who mistake them for real terrors. Now think of real terrors. Like me. You can see me, touch me, hear the words I'm speaking now. And now, I will unleash some terror on you.
Please. Black eyes, that little smoke and mirrors trick. You don't do what I do without seeing some shit, lady. Demons, monsters, tall motherfuckers in the woods. It comes with the territory. Pathetic little teenager makes a deal with the devil, and that kind of deal doesn't come cheap. Oh, you need blood. A lot of blood.
This sinister and vulgar side of Jeff just attracted more and more people who idolized that sort of behavior, and in turn, Jeff's audience became more and more edgy and reflected his new persona. Speaking of the follow-up stories, these newer stories added a lot of extra content. For example, Jane the Killer tells the 2011 story of Jeff, but through the eyes of a completely new character, presumably the other neighbor of Jeff, and her story as she witnesses the events of the first story as well as the aftermath of Jeff's psyche breaking, with Jeff murdering her family as well as her. If Jeff stuck to one story, there wouldn't have been much to go off of, especially because his character in the original story isn't nearly as colorful as it is in the follow-up stories. What I mean by colorful is that in the original story, he seemed like just a troubled kid, and at the end he had some kind of mental break and he became a psychopath. It's only in these follow-up stories that he starts talking all emo and tries to give some kind of twisted justification for what he does.
You should be happy. I'm ending all the suffering that the world might bring you. Away from those who deceive you, who think that just because you have a different look and a mindset than others, then you should be locked up. All those people who think your face is different and you have these so-called torturous fantasies, then you should be in the psycho place. No! I'll never be locked away. Never imprisoned. I'll live my life out here, fulfilling my fantasies of sorts.
The follow-up stories added a new layer of spice to the 2011 story, and although they weren't the best, they truly didn't have to be. Jeff's audience wanted more, and people stopped at nothing to get more. For example, there's a scene in one of the follow-up stories where Jeff breaks into a home and murders a babysitter, but starts having like a cute moment with the baby or something. Basically, the baby is crying and Jeff holds the baby and he places the flat of his knife on the baby's face and promises to kill the baby when they get older. Or more specifically,
Go to sleep for now, kid. When you see a bit more of the world, I'll be back to save you from it.
and then he gives the baby his teddy bear and then leaves him alone. The tone of these follow-up stories really tries to portray Jeff as an anti-hero or a sympathetic villain or something, which, in my opinion, is completely counter to what the creepypasta story was going for. By the end of the 2011 story, Jeff basically just kills people for no reason, and the story doesn't really answer why either. Jeff has no reason to kill innocent people. He wasn't even bullied. He was mugged one time and then was later attacked out of revenge. That's not the same as actual bullying. And even if he was bullied, why does he now go around just killing innocent people? What did they ever do to him? I kind of understand why he wanted to kill his mom. In the text, it's unclear if his dad was actually on board with killing him. It seems to read more like he was just waking up and didn't even have enough time to process the situation yet. I guess his only crime was being related to Jeff or something, I don't know. But why did he want to kill his brother too? He and his brother were the only ones who had each other's backs during the entire story. And why did he go insane? He was supposedly a normal kid before this story and somehow ends up insane by the end of it. And in my opinion at least, none of the trauma he went through in this story is enough to justify him going insane and killing innocent people. I feel like, given the context of this story, it would have made more sense if Jeff killed like bullies or maybe neglectful parents or something, instead of purely innocent people. Then the follow-up angle of making him like an anti-hero or something might have actually worked a little bit better. Instead, we're given a half measure where we are meant to sympathize with Jeff, but he also kills innocent people for no reason. It's a complete contradiction in character writing. It makes him feel hollow as someone who, like, in theory has depth, but in reality has no actual content. Number 3. Jeff is a projection of how other kids feel. Similar to my first point, but Jeff throughout the entire story seems to be the only special one. He's the only one who gets that weird feeling. He says stuff like, "I'm not just some dumb kid." He's hilariously overpowered and can somehow easily beat up 3 12-year-old kids at once, despite the fact that he's only a year older than them. This is something that almost every kid wants to feel. Almost every kid thinks to themselves, "I'm not just some dumb kid," and a lot of kids also want to be special. And this story feels like the perfect substitute for kids to live that fantasy. This story is perfect for any wishful kid to feel like the main character. All they have to do is imagine that they are Jeff the Killer, the super strong and quiet kid who went insane and is now unstoppable. It's a perfect loser kid power fantasy, and in a way, it's almost sad when you think about it. Most of the people who really resonated with a story like this, despite its clear writing flaws, are typically people who feel a lack of control in their own lives. For the majority of the story, Jeff is kind of supposed to be seen as the underdog. He has to deal with moving houses, nobody really understands him or the weird feeling he gets, not even himself, and he's the subject of harassment by these 3 random kids in his area. So while he is hilariously overpowered, it's clear that the subtext is that he's not in control of his own life. And this is something that a lot of early teens and preteens probably resonated with when they read the story. And by the end of it, there is a sense of reclaiming control when he basically becomes an unjustifiable serial killer. Now, while that's obviously a bit extreme, the character progression is still there, despite how flawed it is. The audience may have been able to think of Jeff as some kind of projection of themselves, and so it feels all the more cathartic when he takes back control by the end of the story, even if it is in the form of killing innocent people for some reason. It's also much easier, writing-wise, to have the killer's motivation to kill people be an unexplainable feeling telling him that he has to do it, instead of giving him an actual motivation for his crimes. All of the factors I previously mentioned combine to create this weird alternate world where teenagers control everything, where the adults are essentially at the mercy of teenagers. Not even teenagers, most of these characters are preteens. We can see elements of this in other media, and of course it never really sits right with the audience. Despite everything I've said, I have to give some props to the creepypasta story for being one of the first examples of popular horror that came from the internet, as well as being one of my first encounters with the horror genre, and overall just for being a pretty interesting experience from my childhood. I think one of the things that made it really fun, especially being a little kid at the time, was sometimes feeling like the stories were real. Now don't get me wrong, I eventually found out that it was all fake, obviously, but at first glance, when you're like 6 and you hear that there's a crazy 13-year-old named Jeff who's gonna kill you in your sleep, for some reason that just like makes sense when you're 6. Probably because kids are gullible or something. Something I didn't realize at the time, and I also didn't even include in this video, but at the very beginning of the Jeff the Killer creepypasta, there's an excerpt from a local newspaper where a boy recounts his fight with Jeff, where Jeff attempts to kill him, but the boy was able to fight Jeff off. The age of the boy isn't given, but it's implied that he's younger than Jeff. If you really think about it, Jeff couldn't kill this little child. I don't know why I was so afraid. Somehow Jeff can easily win a 1v3, but can't kill a child. Jokes aside though, not fully knowing that these things were fake was pretty dang scary. Although it isn't the best story, not even a very good story, it scared a whole lot of kids growing up. So in that regard, I'd say Jeff the Killer, for its time, was a massive success.